Hello, Lions of Liberty fans, and one great way to start out your day is with a shot of whiskey. But if you're not an alcoholic, the next best way to start your day is with an amazing cup of coffee. And now you can order coffee, delicious coffee, and also support the Lions of Liberty. We have partnered with Anarcho Coffee to create our own brand of coffee known as the Morning Roar. And let me tell you, this coffee is delicious. I am saying that as someone who just drank 2 cups of it before I recorded this pre-roll. So I can tell you, I'm a little hyped up, and I just had some delicious coffee. And I'd like you to be able to start your day the same way. So I want you to head over to lionsofliberty.com/coffee. You get a 10% discount with your very first order. And if you join the Lions of Liberty Pride for $10 or more per month, which you can do over at patreon.com/Lions of Liberty, you will then get a permanent 15% discount on all future orders. And you're going to want future orders after you try this, let me tell you. But first, give it a shot. Head over to lionsofliberty.com/coffee and start your day with a morning roar.
Welcome to the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here's your host, your guide, your shining beacon of liberty, Marc Claire.
Welcome back to all my liberty-loving friends out there, all my liberty-curious people just tuning in. Maybe you're just tuning in for the first time, but I've been here for 400 episodes. I started this thing on a whim. I called up Stefan Kinsella on Skype. We had a conversation about intellectual property. I turned it into a podcast. It is piss poor, but it is Lions of Liberty episode 1, and we are now over 5 years later here at Lions of Liberty episode 400, and I could not have done this. I would not have done this without all of you out there listening. If the numbers just stayed at the 40 people that listened to the first episode, I would probably not still be here right now. Well, I'd still be here right now. I don't think I'd be dead. I'd probably still be alive. I'd still be talking about liberty, but I wouldn't be doing it on this platform. So thank you to each and every one of you personally who's tuned into this show for whatever reason, even if it's only one time, even if this is that only one time. I still appreciate the click. I still appreciate the download. And I wouldn't be here also if it were not for my amazing friends and partners in this little venture, my good friends John Odermatt and Brian McWilliams. Of course, you can catch Brian every Wednesday with his weekly shot of comedy, culture, and liberty on Electric Liberty Land, while John Odermatt, the man of the hour, he wraps things up every single Friday with his amazing, inspiring, hard-hitting look at the broken criminal justice system. The amazing thing is you get all of these shows for the price of one, and that price is free, my friends. So please do hit that subscribe button. And now we have all sorts of calls to action. Of course, I mentioned the coffee here in the little pre-roll. And of course, I'd love you to check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Lions of Liberty, where we have loads and loads of bonus audio content. I actually did a pause up, pause down. That's what we're calling our movie reviews. A review of Knock Down the House, the little AOC love letter documentary with our good friend Dan Smots from The System Is Down. So that was up there this week. We'll also be having a conspiracy corner coming your way soon. Just endless amounts of audio. Don't forget Do Nothing Man, the amazing Do Nothing Man, the one-man stage play from Brian McWilliams. Just endless amounts of bonus audio. So please do check that out. But really, if there's just one thing you do to celebrate this day for me, to celebrate 400 episodes of doing this, I want you to do just one thing. That is just to tell a friend or a family member, maybe even a stranger, but just tell someone about this podcast. Tell someone why you love this show, why it's affected you, why it would just be great if they just checked it out just one time. Just give it a try. Now, if they have strong opinions on abortion, which will be discussed today, maybe that's not the episode to send them. I'm not sure. I'll let you decide that based on the audience, but that is all I'm asking of you now, except, of course, to enjoy today's show. All right, Lions fans, it has finally arrived, the 400th episode of Lions of Liberty, and I knew I wanted to do something really fun, really exciting, and really non-controversial for this historic occasion, so I took the obvious path of choosing to host a roundtable discussion on the topic of abortion. Because really, what subject could possibly be more associated with joy and celebration than the subject of abortion? I can't think of one, but when I think of abortion, the abortion debate overall, the first person that comes to mind is someone who has discussed this issue at length on this program and otherwise. He takes a very unique position on abortion, known as Evictionism, and he will, of course, detail just what that is in a little bit. He is a senior fellow at the Ludwig von Mises Institute, professor of economics at Loyola University in New Orleans. I'm very pleased to welcome, once again, Professor Walter Block. Walter, are you ready to roar?
Yes, thanks for having me on your show once again. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, when I hear abortion, I think Walter Block. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but but it is the truth. Next up, representing the pro-choice position, she is a second-generation libertarian seeking a more voluntary society for all. This is a little bio that she sent me. But according to critics, she's also a quote-unquote degenerate female, a fucking lunatic, a whore, and a baby-slaying C-word. I can't even bring myself to say that word. You are allowed to curse on the show, but I just couldn't do it. She is, of course, friend of the program, Miss Avens O'Brien.
Hi, it's cunt.
Avens, are you ready to roar?
Cunt, honey. You can just say it. But yes, I'm very excited to be.
I wanted to leave something for you to say.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
And I do need to confirm, legally speaking, are you ready to roar, ma'am?
Oh, absolutely. Rawr.
Excellent. All right. And finally, representing, in a shocking twist, some might say, representing the pro-life position, he is the host of the Part of the Problem podcast, as well as one of the co-hosts of the Legion of Skanks podcast. He is the one and only Mr. Consistency, Dave Smith. Dave, are you ready to roar?
I am. When did you get so averse to cursing?
I have no idea.
Maybe it's just not
I figure
working.
after 400 episodes, it's time to clean my act up just a little bit. It's funny. I mean, the first thing I thought when I think pro-life, I thought to myself, I need someone in something called a Legion of Skanks. That sounds like who I need to represent the pro-life position.
I am disappointing pro-lifers everywhere.
You're like, what? This is the guy? This is the guy? This is our guy? But, you know, the reason I brought you all on here is even though I'm sort of labeling you guys with some take on this position in a way based on sort of the mainstream narratives that we get, I think all three of you, I mean, especially Walter, have very nuanced opinions on this in a way and probably came to your positions in a different way than the average person kind of out there thinks about the topic. So I really want to do a deep dive on the subject because I think it's one of the few subjects out there that, I mean, libertarians argue about all sorts of things, but this is one where there really is, it's more than a divide. I mean, there's just a wide variety of interpretations and how you relate the subject to the libertarian concepts of individual rights and that sort of thing. So first off, I actually just want to start with Walter. Could you do us, I actually did a whole podcast with you about this, episode 315. So if you want a true deep dive just of Walter's explanation on this topic, head over, press pause, go listen to 315 right now and come on back. But Walter, if you could you just please give, just a very brief elevator version summary of your position known as evictionism. I don't know how often you get into conversations in an elevator and do a quick pitch on abortion, but if you ever have, now's some good practice.
Well, there are really two issues and three visions here. I think the three visions are pro-life, pro-choice, and evictionism. And there are two issues here. One is eviction and the other is killing. And I think what abortion is a complex word. It means both. You can kill and you can evict, namely take the baby out of your stomach if you're a pregnant woman. It's similar to a strike, a labor strike. There are really two things going on here. One is a mass quit. The other is preventing scabs from taking your jobs, the jobs that you're spurning. So we have to keep those two things distinct, and those things are very distinct. And the pro-life people say you cannot evict until the 9 months when the baby naturally leaves the womb, and you certainly cannot kill. Whereas the pro-life people say, yes, you can evict and you can kill. So my position is a compromise position between the two. I say, yes, you can evict, but no, you can't kill. I regard it as a compromise position. If I say 2 + 2 is 4 and you say 2 + 2 is 6, a compromise position would be 2 + 2 is 5, but it wouldn't be a principled compromise because there's nothing from which you can deduce that 2 + 2 = 5, except that you want to compromise. Whereas I think that you can have a principle from which you deduce my position, namely evictionism, and the principle is the basic element of libertarianism, the non-aggression principle and private property rights. So I ask, who is the owner of the woman's womb? And based on homesteading, Lockean, Rothbardian homesteading, she was there first, long before the baby. So she's the owner of her body. She owns her body. So she should be able to say who stays in there. And if she doesn't like who is in there, and I use the word who advisedly because I think it's a human being. I don't think it's just a bunch of cells or anything like that. I think it's a human being. I think human life begins with a fertilized egg. The sperm alone and the egg alone will not become a person. The fertilized egg will if put in the right environment, and we all need the right environment. So it's a person right in there, and I think if she doesn't want the baby in there, she has a right to evict it, but not to kill it. because it's an innocent trespasser. Now, take the case of rape. A woman's walking down the street, she gets grabbed, she gets raped, she gets impregnated, and that is a person growing inside of her. Well, what are the rights and obligations that she has toward this person, this very small person? Again, I say, well, if she doesn't want the baby in her, well, then she can evict it. But she can't kill it because it's an innocent trespasser. It has no mens rea. Now, the bottom line here is that in the first 6 months, the first 2 trimesters, if she evicts the baby will die. Whereas in the 3rd trimester, if she evicts the baby can be viable outside the womb. So it's a compromised position. Namely, my position safeguards 1/3 of all babies, whereas the pro-life position safeguards all babies, and the pro-choice position safeguards no babies. And as medical technology progresses, we will eventually come to the 5th month, the 4th month, and the 3rd, etc., until the baby will be safe outside of the womb, in which case eviction will mean the pro-life position in effect.
All right. Thank you very much, Walter. And I will now move on to Avens. And Avens, obviously everybody out there knows the term pro-choice, pro-life, what it generally means. But if maybe you could just explain sort of how you came to your position, and then maybe highlight, I guess, how your pro-choice position would differ from Walter's evictionism position.
Sure. And I know we've actually had a conversation prior where I kind of identified with the evictionist position, which I do to a degree. I'm also pro-choice because I think that these two things kind of work concurrently, but I reckon, I'm actually looking forward to this discussion to understand kind of where Walter and I differ in terms of the inaction of something. But, I would say that when you talk to people who are pro-choice in general, you'll actually find that a number of them do have a line in which they are no longer, they consider themselves pro-choice, but then they have a line where they're like, okay, at this many weeks, I no longer believe in that. There absolutely is, the majority of people who are pro-choice have that perspective. I take a particular stance, one, because I oppose government. So there's 2 things for me, is that there's the governmental, the legal stances of abortion, and then the moral positions of abortion. And, as a libertarian trying to, determine where those lie, or if you think that government should be involved at all, is often, a huge debate within our circles, where even sometimes pro-choicers and pro-lifers will actually be on the same side because they have the same opinion about where government should stand on this. I'm adamantly pro-choice, and I do not actually see abortion as a moral problem, particularly in the first trimester. Generally throughout the second trimester, though I understand the nuance of recognizing that at some point you have 2 people with competing rights existing in one body, like a body existing in another body. And that's why actually evictionism can sometimes appeals to me to some degree. But I strongly believe that it's a woman's prerogative whether or not she's going to remove something from her body, whether that means killing it or not. And that it has absolutely no right to be there without her express continued consent. And as a result, consistently, I apply that throughout the pregnancy, even to unpopular degrees of saying, no, I don't believe that any law should be involved at any stage of the pregnancy. And when I recognize a moral issue, when I recognize, hey, there may be a moral issue with a 3rd trimester abortion, I still would not put myself in a position of telling someone else what to do, because there are so many reasons that people opt to do a 3rd trimester abortion, which is less than 1% of all abortions. And so I don't ever want to be in the way of someone having to figure out that choice for themselves, considering the fact that nobody makes a decision like that lightly. And so, that's how I came to that. Is my entire life I've seen it as my body, for any individual person, you can't make the decision about what someone else is going to do with their own body. And I recognize that to many people, especially in the pro-life space, they see it as there's somebody else's body in there, but that doesn't preclude the fact that it is somebody's body that it is going to be irreparably changed and probably damaged from proceeding with that pregnancy and with that birth. And I don't think that anyone has the right to tell someone else what to do with that.
Right. Well, we'll dive into obviously more of the differences in a bit, but I just want to confirm, like, would you say your main difference between your position and Walter's is that there's no point where you would say there should be a sort of even moral restriction on removing the fetus, even if it involves killing it, whereas Walter might include that restriction. And we'll, dive into the legal implications of that, but
a moral restriction?
Maybe we should
is there a point which I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, maybe not moral, but in terms of what you believe should be allowed, whether that's moral, legal, or what have you.
Legally, I don't believe in restrictions. From a moral standpoint, I would say that I'm not overly concerned with people making that choice, because overwhelmingly people make the correct choice on that, which is they get rid of it before it's viable. And if they don't, then a lot of people have their own reasons for doing so. A lot of that has to do with their medical concerns, problems with the fetus, or things related to that. Statistics overwhelmingly show that. And so it's kind of like being concerned about something that barely exists. And I'm not really I don't sit there worrying about those things.
Okay. And we can, dive into the nuance.
Yeah, we'll dive into it.
And lastly, bringing up the rear here, Dave, you probably have the most, maybe biggest evolution on this subject. I don't know exactly where you were a couple of years ago, but I just from listening to your show, this is something you've definitely evolved on quite a bit since having your own child. So if you could just maybe detail maybe where you were like 4 or 5 years ago, or even before you became a libertarian, and how your position has evolved since then.
Sure. Okay, so I was once upon a time pro-choice. I was also a statist, and I look back at both of them in a very similar way. I can't believe that I ever supported either of them, and I think that the more I look at the pro-choice position, I find it to be very morally wrong, illogical, and completely arbitrary. I am much more sympathetic to Professor Bloch's evictionist position, although I have not been completely convinced by it. So I would consider myself pro-life. I think it's completely consistent with libertarianism to be pro-life. I'm a Rothbardian. I am a Blochian. I favor a private property, private law society, but I do believe that in the Blochian tradition, I am allowed one deviation. So this is my deviation, that I'm not sold on the evictionism. Look, having a baby, who, by the way, you might hear my baby crying at some point. I live in New York City. We have very small apartments. So at some point you might hear her from the other room. But yeah, that's really what changed my mind. And it wasn't just the experience of having a baby, but it was the experience of my wife being pregnant. And when you have a pregnant wife, you learn a lot more about the development of a fetus as you're constantly going in for sonograms and you're constantly researching about this stuff. And it is shocking how quick fetuses develop. And after having a baby, one of the things that really kind of amazed me was realizing, oh man, just a few minutes ago, this baby was inside of my wife, and now my daughter's in my arms. And there really is no substantial difference. There's nothing magical about the birth canal that changed this entity. So I completely agree with Walter Bloch that the only reasonable starting point for when a human being is a human being is upon conception. Anything other than that is completely arbitrary. What are you going to say? It's when the heart beats. It's when there's the first brain wave. It's when the organs first start to develop. By the way, all of that happens shockingly early. We're talking 6-7 weeks before that's all happened. Also, when the baby can feel pain, is pretty early. That's not as scientifically conclusive. Anyway, I think that the idea that libertarians don't want to say what someone can or can't do with their body is a misunderstanding of libertarianism. We specifically say exactly what you can and can't do with your body, namely that you can't initiate force against another person or against their property. So we're all about telling people what they can and can't choose to do, what they can and can't do with their body, and we're very clear. You cannot initiate force. That's the line. And the idea that you just don't want the government involved, that, to me, that's like saying you don't want the government involved in murder. And one of the things that I've always loved about libertarians, one of the things that drew me to the movement was that we call things what they are. We reject euphemisms. We say taxation is theft. War is mass murder. And what is abortion? Okay, look, even in this eviction idea, this is not something that actually exists in reality. In every single case that an abortion is performed, you're murdering a baby. That's what you're doing. I don't know of any instance of abortion, whether it's first, second, third trimester abortions, where they're evicting a baby that then they leave and allow to live on its own or will try to resuscitate. Now, just quickly, because I don't want to go on too long here, but I think it's completely consistent with libertarian philosophy that a woman who's pregnant has an obligation to carry her baby to term. The analogy that I would use, and I know a lot of people have done different ones of this, but I use the hot air balloon. I say, if you have a hot air balloon that's on the ground and you invite someone into your hot air balloon, you can then show them around and then say, I'd like you to leave. You can kind of ask them to leave your property. That's fine. But if you put them in a hot air balloon and you take it up 1,000 feet, and you say, I just decided I'd like you to leave now. Well, no, because your action of inviting them in has now taken on a certain responsibility where you have a responsibility to now safely bring them back down to the ground. You can think about going into a restaurant and eating the food. Your action has now incurred a responsibility to pay for that food. Now, I understand that this is murky when it comes to rape, but for the 99% of the time when rape is not the situation, when abortions are performed, I think this logic completely holds. And even in the case of rape, I think that the rapist is a horrible, evil person. He should be responsible for all of the medical bills, plus go to jail, plus all whatever else, 2 tooths for a tooth or whatever. You get to rape him twice. I don't know what the Rothbardian answer is exactly to this, but
I think that is the official Rothbardian position, that you get to rape the rapist twice.
I might not be wrong.
I have to reread Ethics of Liberty, though.
Well, Walter Block is the one to give the answer on this. But I would just say that in the same way that a woman can't decide when a baby is 3 months old, if she was raped, that, I want to kill the baby now because I just can't live with my rapist baby. I don't think you should ever be allowed to kill a baby. I understand the distinction that Professor Block is making. However, in reality, in the reality of the situation, every abortion that's performed is murder. You're not evicting someone peacefully if you're taking a vacuum cleaner that's going to suck off their arms and legs and suck them out of the room. That's not an appropriate way to evict someone. I also kind of reject, and I'll finish on this, but I also kind of reject the idea of a direct comparison between a baby and a trespasser. To me, a trespasser is, even if you call it an innocent trespasser, a trespasser is someone who's going somewhere that they're not supposed to be. I don't know where a fetus is supposed to be other than in its mother's womb. So I don't know. I could keep ranting on this, but I think that's probably enough time.
We'll have plenty more opportunities to rant some more as we go throughout the show. And there's obviously many different directions we could go here. I kind of want to start on one point and just see if you guys are all on the same page. I think Walter and Dave probably will be, and Avens might be too, but does anyone disagree with just that general idea that when there is a fertilized fetus, that is a life? Would you make any contention with that? I guess Avens particularly?
It's a life, sure.
Like a human life?
It presuming that it doesn't miscarry or get aborted,
right.
Then it will become a human.
Okay. Do you think that? I guess I should say, do you think your view on that life differs from what you've heard Dave or Walter say and how they describe it as a life?
I mean, I don't attach the sentimentality of this is a human life that needs protection, but I recognize it as a life. Okay. Yeah. And
I think most libertarians do. And I think that's one area where, often outside in the mainstream, they get bogged down in like Dave was kind of saying, is it when the heart beats? Is it when they feel pain? And I think we can all agree that these are sort of arbitrary distinctions. We should either sort of agree this is a life of some kind that's growing or it's not. And I think we pretty much agree on that, even if we might draw different conclusions. So that's cool. Would you agree with that? the way I laid it out there? Okay. So good. We all agree and we can end the podcast. It is life. I want to go back to Walter since I started with you. Would you like to point out anything specific? Why don't we start with just from Avens' position, from her stated pro-choice position? Is there anything there that specifically stands out to you that you would say is inconsistent with libertarian philosophy and why why it differs from your view that you take with evictionism?
Well, yeah, I'd like to criticize both of them. And before I do, I think that if we had a vote, each of them would support me as a moderate between them, then they would support each other. Which doesn't mean I'm right. It just means I'm the middle. And that's
Walter
reasonable.
Block for president of abortion.
Well, just
of moderate perspectives. Walter Block bringing the moderate perspective.
That's right. That's why they call me Walter Moderate Block. I'm
the Great Compromiser, I believe, is one of your nicknames.
Right. By the way, in the Jewish Talmudic tradition, the baby isn't viable until it graduates medical school.
Yeah.
But that's just a
How late did
joke.
you stay up coming up with that one? I think I've actually heard you tell that joke before.
That joke is extremely common. In my family, it would have been law school, so I'm not even viable yet.
Okay, well, keep working at it. You'll become viable one day.
Looking forward to it.
If you want to. Well, I disagree with Avens, and please call me Walter. Dave, you've been calling me Professor Block. We're all on first name basis. We're all friendly here. I disagree with Avens. I think that her pro-choice view means that the woman can kill, not just evict, but kill in the third trimester. And I think that would be murder. If the baby is in the 8th month and the baby is perfectly viable outside the womb, and you can evict, and you're supposed to, in the libertarian view, evict in the gentlest manner possible, consistent with evicting. I mean, if the only way to evict is to pull arms and legs off, well, then too bad, because we libertarians believe in the sanctity of private property rights, and the woman owns her body. So she has a right to evict. But Avens is going further than that and saying, well, not only does she have a right to evict, but she has a right to say, I want that baby dead, even though it could be alive. And there are other people who are maybe couples that can't have a child, they're infertile, and they want to adopt this baby. And this woman is killing an innocent baby, and killing an innocent person, I think, is murder. So I would disagree with her in the 3rd trimester. Where I disagree with Dave is in the first 2 trimesters, where he says that you're not even allowed to evict. And I disagree with his hot air balloon, although I think it's very clever. I congratulate him on it. I think it's a good try, but I don't think it succeeds, because there's a disanalogy between inviting someone into a balloon, and I agree about implicit contracts. You know, you drink a cup of coffee and they present you a bill with $1 million. You don't have to pay $1 million. But there's a disanalogy. The disanalogy is that you invited the person into your balloon. So you do have an implicit obligation to, if you got to get out of the balloon at 300 feet, to give everyone a parachute or, treat him the way you would treat yourself. But at the time of intercourse, remember, there's nobody to invite. The baby, the fertilized egg, we've admitted, or we've all agreed, is a human being. But at the time of ejaculation, it takes a little while for the sperm to get up in that tube, the fallopian tube, I think, something like that. It takes a while for the sperm to get to the egg. So there is no person to invite at the time of sexual intercourse. So therefore, there's certainly a disanalogy. So I disagree with both. I disagree with Dave in the first 2 trimesters, and I disagree with Avens in the 3rd trimester. I agree with each of them in the other places where, for example, I agree with Avens in Avens in the first 2 trimesters, and I agree with Dave in the 3rd trimester, but not for the same reasons. It's just that we come out on the same side of the issue. And I certainly agree with Dave's criticism with Avens about telling other people what to do. We are libertarians, and we most certainly do tell other people what to do. Namely, we say, don't murder, don't steal, don't rape, whatever. Now, let's take the case, forget about rape. Well, you see, I think rape is the strongest case against Dave. And Dave, I think, was a little uncomfortable with the rape case because, clearly there's no obligation of the woman. She didn't agree to anything. But now let's take the case of voluntary sexual intercourse. The woman engages in voluntary sexual intercourse. Maybe she used birth control, but it failed, or maybe she wanted to have the baby. But there was no invitation. At the time of sexual intercourse, there could not be an invitation, because for an invitation to occur, there has to be an invitor and an invitee. And there's no invitee. Now, there is one case where I agree totally with Dave, and that Dave or David, Dave,
Professor Smith.
I totally with Dave, and that's the case of the host mother. So let's say me and my wife are infertile. We want to hire Avens, who's a woman, and we say, Avens, we'll give you $100,000. Allow my sperm or whatever it is into your body through some medical procedure, say. And now she can't evict because she is contractually obligated to keep that baby for 9 months. So that would be the only case where I'm totally pro-life because it's based on contract, which is a subsidiary of property rights.
All right. Avens, do you want to respond first? Because maybe particularly just to that circumstance? I mean, I'm kind of curious what you think of, let's say you did actually sign a contract saying you would bring a baby to term. Would you still agree with your right to abort that child at some point?
So I think that one of the points that kind of leads into this is the idea of consistency of like, yes, we tell people what to do when it comes to aggression. The thing about that though is that we have a complete allowance for defensive force, and so like in the event of like if someone's attacking you, right, you can defend yourself to the extent that that person might die. If you could defend yourself with a gun and you might kill them, and you were defending yourself. A lot of where I come from in terms of a woman and her ability to abort at any point has to do with self-defense. And I'm not even speaking only to life-threatening circumstances, but the fact is abortion irreparably changes a woman's body and in many cases damages it. But giving birth, pregnancy and birth do so. And so at any point, I see that as an acceptable use of force to stop that thing from happening, regardless of the innocence of the fetus. And I recognize, like, it's not like the fetus means to, kill its mother on its way out or cause, preeclampsia or gestational diabetes or any of these other problems. But to me, that's a huge aspect of why I stand for that. That's why I see it as like, this is defensive force at all times. As for, a contract, I would say that a contractual obligation to be a surrogate, I would say that an intelligent surrogate would include a stipulation that if there was some medical thing and written out with a doctor in terms of what are high risk situations, then yes, that they should be able to abort, and that should be considered contractual. That should be contractually protected. So I would say that like somebody needs to have an intelligent contract written, and that a contract should have like enormous caveats for the possibilities that happen during pregnancy, because there's an enormous list of potential problems in a pregnancy, and a smart surrogate subjecting themselves to a contract, they would be in violation of the contract if they terminated it after agreeing to have it, unless the caveats were in there about the circumstances in which they could.
So I guess then it's more of a question of, so should she then be forced to keep it and not get an abortion? Or perhaps like if this were ever a real kind of contract, it would include something like you have to pay us X amount of money if you abort or something.
There would be presumably damages. I'm a big fan of contract law when it comes to like agreements of any kind, but yes, this included. I think another state, and I know there's a bunch of things I can rebut, like, I was trying to keep notes of things and there's so much to discuss. But one of the other things is that I believe in a lot of cases markets can solve a lot of problems. And one of the interesting points is that when it comes to, yes, okay, do I believe that a woman should be able to abort a perfectly healthy 8-month-along fetus because she, and if she's perfectly healthy, is she allowed to do that? The fact is that doctors don't do that. Like, it's like, if I'm perfectly healthy and I have a perfectly healthy, baby, and I'm 8 months pregnant, and I go in and I'm just like, I just want an abortion. The majority of doctors actually already just suggest, like first they go, okay, why do you want to remove this? And then the majority of doctors actually, there's a whole segment of people who have C-sections to remove that, because most doctors will not perform a third trimester abortion. There are 5 doctors in the United States that will perform an elective abortion after 26 weeks. And on top of that, an abortion that's elective in a third trimester is something like $25,000. The market already doesn't allow for this. And so when it comes to, women opting to have a third trimester abortion, they're not opting. They're people who are choosing to for medical reasons, which means their insurance is covering it and their doctors are willing to do it. But like there isn't like a slew of doctors who are willing to do this. To perform an 8-month abortion. They'd rather just have the the C-section, and that is extreme. That is actually, I mean, it's not even that common that a woman goes at 8 months, I can't be pregnant anymore. But in the event that she does, that actually, like, the procedure that doctors do is they perform C-sections, because one, they don't want to concern about liability, and typically is an easier thing to perform. Even in states where it's completely legal to do an abortion up till the end, because nobody does that.
And Walter, is there anything you want to respond to there? I also want to make sure I can get Dave back in to kind of rebut what you were criticizing over his position. But.
Oh, yes. I think I'm on the verge of converting Avens to the one true faith. Avens, suppose, I have no doubt that you're right. 99.9% of doctors won't do it, and 99.9% of women won't do it. But suppose someone did it. Would they be guilty of murder, in your view?
I'm not sure.
If so, you're an evictionist. Suppose that they did it. Then what's your attitude toward the doctor and the woman who did this? A perfectly healthy 8-month-long fetus and a perfectly healthy mother who could have evicted, and the baby would have been alive, and they decided to kill the baby.
Well, one way or another, I'm pretty unhappy about that situation, because I think that if a woman wanted to have an abortion, she should have made that decision earlier.
No. The question is, are they murderers if they did it?
I'm not sure.
Hey friends, I got to take a quick pause here to tell you about another great libertarian podcast out there. It's called Free Man Beyond the Wall, hosted by the artist formerly known as Mance Raider, now known simply by his real name of Pete Raymond. And I got to tell you, Pete is a machine. This guy brings you a new episode of his own every single Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and he has done some absolutely fantastic in-depth interviews. He's had on everybody from Ron Paul to Thaddeus Russell to Phil Labonte, the lead singer of All That Remains, a very diverse group of guests, not always libertarians. He also did a great show with a Washington, D.C. insider lobbyist revealing a lot of the dirt that goes on behind the scenes in DC. He has done so many interviews that I have just said, darn, I wish I did this one myself. So I really do want to highly recommend checking out Free Man Beyond the Wall. You can find it over at freemanbeyondthewall.com, as well as iTunes, Stitcher, and all those fancy podcatchers out there. I think in many ways that is what this debate comes down to, because we all pretty much agree it is taking a life, one way or the other. The only question is if we're defining it in the libertarian sense as murder, which would be like an aggressive, unjustified taking of that life, right, or if we're defining it as defense, self-defense in the libertarian sense.
Well, Avens is right on the fence. If she agrees it's murder, she's an evictionist. If she says, no, I don't like it, I think it's immoral, but they're innocent, then she's a true pro choice.
Well, as I've said, I mean, as I think even Marc, when he approached me for this conversation, he's like, I know you identify primarily with evictionism. I just think, like, Walter, there are things that, like, within your scope of evictionism, I'm not totally sold on. But no, I mean, I agree that my position, I'm a pro-choicer that happens to think that evictionism is the best way to go about things. I just simply don't like think that there's that much of a problem with abortion later term, simply because I don't see those as a big problem.
In ancient England, they would say, I dub thee knight. The queen would put a sword on the guy's shoulder or something. Well, I dub thee evictionist.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Welcome to the group. If you were closer, I'd give you a hug.
I believe Walter just declared himself a partial victor, at least so far.
If it was voluntary, that is.
All right.
So now
let's not go
all Walter and me versus Dave. Come on, Dave.
Let's see if you guys can pull Dave on over. Now, Dave, is there anything specific about Walter's criticism of your sort of newfound pro-life position?
Well, can I just?
Yeah, you can do whatever you want.
Can I just address the idea of killing a baby at 8 months pregnant? I mean, look, guys, this is so clear-cut murdering a baby. And I know, Avens, you're like hesitant to just say, yes, this is murder. Listen, I have a friend of mine who just gave birth 7 weeks early. Her boy is absolutely fine. That's a baby that came out of her. This is absolutely a baby. Unless you believe there's something magical about the birthing canal, this is a baby. There is no other way to describe what you would be doing there. And by the way, maybe a little bit aside from libertarianism or outside of the scope, but I don't think killing a baby is on the same moral level as killing anyone on this podcast right now. I actually think it's far, far worse. I really do. It almost. And look, I used to be pro-choice, but I feel almost the way I do about when I was a statist. I just can't believe that I ever believed that. And I can't believe how you would look at an 8-month-old baby as not being murder. And the idea that you say it happens very rarely, I mean, that is true. It happens rarely. It does happen, but it is rare. I think it's a little bit over 1% of abortions are in late term. But also the rape example, which I'm about to have to deal with, that also is very rare, and that always gets thrown at people on the pro-life side. So if we have to deal with rare situations, we still have to. And I think part of thinking about what it is to kill an 8-month baby, also it shows that it becomes this slippery slope where exactly do you draw the line that it's okay to kill a baby? Look, as far as to Walter's criticism of me, I agree it's not exactly the same as the analogy that I'm using in a hot air balloon. And yes, you're right. You're not technically inviting somebody because somebody doesn't exist yet. Listen, and I know, Walter, you have kids, and so I think everyone who has kids is kind of aware of this. It's kind of a magical process, having kids. It's really something unbelievable. I mean, you and your wife kind of rub together, and 9 months later, there's a baby there. It's the closest thing we have to magic, and it's also the most beautiful thing that human can do,
I'm going to clip off that soundbite and just market it as Dave Smith explained sex to your children. You and your wife rub together, and then there's a baby.
I've already explained it to my 5-month-old. She doesn't seem to be getting it. But there is, you're right. It's not technically inviting somebody, but you are kind of summoning them into existence in some sense. And look, the truth is, if somebody is taking an action that is going to have a responsibility with it, the reason human beings have sex is to reproduce. The reason we're attracted to one another biologically is to reproduce. I don't mean in the sense that everyone has sex to reproduce, but I mean the reason why we have this genetic drive, the reason why men are attracted to breasts and are attracted to birthing hips. I mean, all of this is very biological. Everybody knows, I'm sure you could find some exception, but everybody knows that pregnancy is something that can happen from sex, or just about everybody knows. I mean, I think that if somebody has the responsibility there, it's like, look, now, in the case of rape, I do agree that it makes the libertarian position much more difficult. But I mean, look, I have no problem with a woman who's raped going to the hospital and taking a morning after pill, which in my opinion is not abortive. It would get rid of the baby before conception, which is where we said the line of when a life is created would be decided. But I mean, think about it. Just think about a woman who's raped and then carries a baby around for 7 months, 8 months, and then decides, I want to abort. I want to have a late trimester abortion because I was raped. I mean, is that legitimate? Why would it be if a baby, if a woman, and now this isn't toward Walter, this is because he wouldn't be for the murdering part, but if a woman wanted to murder her 3 or 4 month old baby, why would that not be okay if it was because she was raped? I mean, because the baby is an innocent person here. Now, I understand that Walter is correct that the invitation is murky. It's not a direct analogy. It's not perfect, but the idea is there some responsibility to this baby who is now a completely innocent person who's brought into the world by no choice of their own? And can we say that you can now, even if you're talking about evicting, look, when Avens was talking about very few doctors will do this after 24 weeks. Listen, by the way, I was completely ignorant to all this stuff until my wife was pregnant. I had a baby. A baby is so developed at 24 weeks. That is a baby inside of you. By 12 weeks, it's clearly a baby. I mean, this is like, this is murdering a baby right there. So now it's like, if you have a baby and you're in this hot air balloon, let's say the baby's dropped into your hot air balloon, you didn't invite the baby in, there's no invitation at all, but you're in your hot air balloon and you're kind of coming down toward the ground. Do you have some obligation to not drop them out and to keep them there until they're on the ground? So I think the morning after pill, I think is okay with me, and also with other people like Ron Paul, the greatest human being on the planet. He said that the morning after pill is okay with him. I believe the morning,
maybe Avens or one of you will know, but I'm pretty sure the morning after pill doesn't actually cause an abortion. It just prevents the pregnancy. And yeah, so yes. that's why it still fits into like your moral view and Ron Paul's moral view.
Walter Block is shaking his head, but Ron Paul, the greatest human being on the planet, who's an OBGYN, says I'm right.
Well, according to my medical degree, which is non-existent, as is my Talmudic knowledge of, when the baby is viable when it gets out of medical school. My understanding is if you have sexual intercourse at 8 o'clock at night on a Monday night,
how'd you know?
And you take a morning after pill on Tuesday morning, there's a fertilized egg in there. The fertilized, it only takes a half hour for the sperm to get to the egg, or an hour, or whatever it is. It doesn't take a whole night. So if you favor the morning after pill and you understand biology the way I do, I'm going to dub thee an evictionist also, Dave. You're going to have to take back that morning after pill, because I think, maybe someone will correct me wrong who's a doctor or knows more about this than me, but my understanding of the timing is the morning after pill can be taken 12 hours after sexual intercourse, and for the time for the sperm to reach the egg ain't no 12 hours. It's more 12 minutes or an hour or something like that. So if you're really serious about that morning after pill, you're an evictionist.
So I just did a quick search just because I had read about this before, but I wanted to confirm what I believe. It is actually the morning after pill, and I don't want to get too bogged into the details because we're really discussing the morality here, but I believe the morning after pill actually just reduces the risk of pregnancy. So if a pregnancy has not occurred yet, it will greatly reduce the chance of that happening, whereas the abortion pill will actually stop a pregnancy that has occurred. So there is a distinction.
Yeah, that was my understanding from my research as well, is that it actually stops it before the pregnancy occurs.
Whenever we dispute on the facts, what we can do is take it two ways. One, let's assume I'm right, and then you agree with me. Namely, you can't have a morning after pill. On the other hand, if you're correct in your physical assessment of the biological reality, then you're not an evictionist just because you favor the morning after pill. So we don't have to argue who's right or who's wrong. We probably Google this and find out, but we have the hypothetical.
That's what I just said.
Okay, I agree with that.
I wanted to reply to Dave's point about you're in your hot air balloon and you're on the way down and you're just 20 feet from the ground, and all of a sudden a baby, a 2-year-old, doesn't have to be a fetus, a 2-year-old or an adult, anyone, gets dropped into your hot air balloon, and if you drop them at 20 feet, or let's say you're still 50 feet up, and the person will die. Now, I don't like that example. The reason I don't like it, although I think it's very powerful on your side, the reason I don't like it is because this is an attempt to chip away at private property rights. And I say private property rights uber alles. There's this flagpole case. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but just in case not, let me reiterate the flagpole. So you're on the 20th floor and you're on a deck, and somehow you slip. And you're on the 19th floor and you're holding a flagpole. And what you want to do is go hand over hand into the 19th stories apartment, and then go back upstairs to where you were before. And, the attack on private property rights is, in this case, surely the hell with private property rights. The homeowner has no right to tell you get off the flagpole. That's the sort of an example you're giving me. And I don't like that example because it's an attack on private property rights. And if we're really libertarians, we have to withstand that. We have to be firm. We have to be callous. We have to be nasty. We have to say private property rights uber alles. And I tell you this, more people will live if we adhere to strict private property rights and we don't allow any exceptions, because then you get this slippery slope. Oh, well, if we'll denigrate private property rights in your balloon case and we'll denigrate it in the flagpole case, well, how about denigrating it here? Let's have welfare or something. So we don't want to let the cloven hoof of the evil devil, namely anti-property rights, get in. We want to resist that. And it's easy to resist that because these examples on an empirical basis, Avens is talking about empirical stuff, 1%, and she's absolutely right. They don't really mean that much, because how many people are on a flagpole? How many people get dropped into a hot air balloon when it's 50 feet high and you're on your way down? This is just a theoretical thing. So if we're in this theory, we have to adhere to property rights. We don't want to just jettison libertarianism because we're libertarians. And that's what keeps us going. Before in the introduction, when Marc was introducing and they were asking, well, how did you get there? How did you get there? Dave got there because of his baby. Avens got there because of her experience as a woman. You know how I got to my position? Libertarianism. I'm a maniacal libertarian. I'm a rabid libertarian. Yes, it's true I'm moderate, but I'm a rabid libertarian, and I don't want to give 1 inch.
The rabidly moderate compromiser.
Right. And to give into this a flagpole or to give into this a hot air balloon is to give 1 inch away, and I'm not giving it a single goddamn inch.
I don't know if the analogies are, I mean, I think the analogies help to illustrate points in some ways, but I don't know if they're all that effective in clarifying the moral case in all situations. So I do want to dig in because we're kind of starting to ramp towards the end of our time here. I do want to dig in a little more to the sort of moral versus legal aspect, because there are many libertarians who will say, I'm morally pro-life. I want to encourage people to not have abortions, but I don't think the state should be involved. So I'm kind of curious of where you take your position on this, and if there's any, do you think there should be a regular, I don't say a regular abortion, but an abortion of any kind at any level, should that be treated the same as a murder in the legal system, or would you sort of take a different enforcement tact on it for some reason?
Well, I certainly do think that there are moral areas that are outside of libertarianism. That, in other words, libertarianism is a legal philosophy of justice. So there are lots of immoral things you can do that shouldn't be illegal. I think abortion, again, in every single instance that it is practiced, is killing a baby. I mean, there is no actual real world example of an abortion where you evict the baby and then send it on its way. So yes, I think that should be illegal. Now, how exactly you would go about punishing that, I think under current situations, it's a little bit of a murky area. For example, when the Nazis fell after World War II, they basically punished like high level people and then down to a certain level. And then after that, they were basically like, look, you were caught up in Nazism. I don't know. This is what overtook the entire society. We can't throw every single German who is sympathetic to the Nazis in jail. I mean, as a libertarian, I see war as nothing but state-sanctioned mass murder. Now, for troops who have gone over to Iraq, or maybe next week will be over in Venezuela, a lot of them may have committed murder. I don't know if I would actually say that if us libertarians ever got our way and we had the society we wanted, we should go around throwing every single one of them in jail. This is just like kind of a practical issue to me. I mean, maybe there's a certain point where we would say, well, this was the general thinking of the time. It was wrong. I would like to make abortion illegal, to not allow abortion clinics, which are essentially murdering babies from my perspective. And I will just say very quickly that I do agree with Walter Block that a private property-based society is going to save a lot more lives than it will cost. It's a utilitarian argument, but I do agree with it. I was surprised that he didn't like the hypotheticals after I saw his wonderful lecture at Mises University last year that was filled with hypotheticals, but they were all great. The only counter I would say to that is that I believe that a society that doesn't value life is a very dangerous slippery slope as well. And a society that can decide that because some life is inconvenient, this life can now be murdered, which I think Professor Block, I'm sorry, I'm going to keep calling you that, would concede in the vast majority of abortions, that's exactly what we're doing. And that to me is a very, very slippery slope, where a society can say, well, there's one group of people who are inconvenient, or we don't really care about them, so we're okay with snuffing their life out. And that would concern me even more than some minor property rights of the woman violation.
I do have a question I kind of want to propose to both Dave and Avens. I think I already kind of know Walter's thoughts on this. It's based on viability, but do you either of you see any kind of moral difference, just from a moral perspective, of an abortion, like literally hour one, right after that fetus is considered fertilized, versus month 8? Is there any moral difference there? Obviously, visually and in terms of thinking the reality of it, it seems totally different, but is there a moral distinction?
Dave, go first.
Okay. Well, certainly one makes my stomach go upside down and one doesn't. So yeah, I mean, I look, the idea of an hour one abortion does not get a visceral reaction out of me in the same way that obviously that a second term or third term abortion would. The idea also, I mean, if we are going to play the card that some analogies are ridiculous, this is the idea of an hour one abortion is insane. I mean, a woman, it takes weeks before a woman's late on her period. It's about 5 weeks before a home pregnancy test will tell you that you're pregnant. Even with the most powerful sonogram in the world, I don't think there's any way anyone could detect that you were pregnant in the first few hours. While one may get more of an emotional reaction out of me, if we're talking about 5, 6, 7, 8 week abortions, morally, logically, I don't see any reason why it's not just as much of a murder.
Avens?
I certainly see a difference between an abortion the first trimester versus the third trimester. I absolutely see a difference between those two. And I recognize that, like, the way I look at it is I have no moral issue with a abortion in the first trimester. I have few moral issues with abortions in the second trimester, and we can have conversations about, like, is that, like, whatever, not a good thing. And then the third trimester, no, I totally recognize that, like, the idea of someone having an elective abortion in the third trimester is gross, and it's bad, and we don't want that to happen. So no, I absolutely see. I mean, I absolutely see it as there's a spectrum of social acceptability, moral acceptability, and that.
Well, I disagree with both of my partners here. I see no difference between a 1 hour-old baby and an 8.5-old, rather, baby fetus. Same thing. It's sort of like, who would you rather kill, a 17-year-old, a 25-year-old, or a 52-year-old? It's the same thing. It's just evil murder. And I don't care how old you are. I don't care how old the fetus is. I also wanted to say that I agree with Avens on the surrogate mother. Probably any reasonable contract for a surrogate mother would be that if her health deteriorates, then all bets are off. So I think that's a good point, and I thank you for that. And also, I wanted to say to Dave or Mr. Smith, if he's going to call me Professor Block, I got to call him Mr. Smith. Got to have even Stephen here.
We should just all be sirs, like knights of old. Since Walter's knighting people here.
I'm not against hypotheticals. I live and breathe by hypotheticals. It's just that I disagree with your use of the hypothetical. I think it was a nice try, but I thought your hypothetical was an attempt to undermine property rights, so I disagreed with that hypothetical or that use of the hypothetical. I wanted to say one other thing. You said Ron Paul is the greatest person on the planet, and I don't disagree. But Ron Paul was pro-life. And another great person who I'm sure you'll agree with me is Murray Rothbard. And Murray Rothbard was pro-choice. And these are two of our heroes. These are our mother and father of libertarianism, or, it's hard to think of anyone that we revere.
Which one's mom?
Ron and Murray rubbed up against each other and made all of us.
I mean, I think I can speak for all four of us when I say that they're both heroes of ours. And yet they were 180 degrees apart from each other. And happily, my theory is a way to compromise between the two of them. You hate it when your mommy and your daddy fight. Kids don't like it. Well, I don't know which one's the mommy and which one's the daddy, or two daddies. Or,
no, he's the child, but Murray aborted him.
Right.
So.
These
Walter
are our two
is the marriage
daddies.
counselor, basically, here.
I'm the child, and Murray and Ron are our two daddies, not just my two daddies, our two daddies. And we hate to see them fight. Well, one way to get your parents to stop fighting is to get them to compromise. And this is a compromise. And it's not just a compromise that divides 2 + 2 = 4 = 6 = 5. It's a principled compromise, and it's based on property rights, which we all adhere to. And I think that both Murray and Ron are wrong. They didn't deduce properly from their own theory of private property rights. The woman's body is her property right. She has a right to say who's in there for whatever reason. She has no right to kill, murder, but she has a right to evict.
All right. Well, I think we've all gotten, the basic summary of everyone's position out there. So I'd like to sort of move on to our casual closing statements, if you will. But I'd also like you each to think about maybe if there's a good point or maybe a position that you were slightly moved on or thought about things slightly differently from something you heard, or maybe just a good point that someone else made. Just, trying to sprinkle some nicety back into the conclusion here. But I will allow, why don't we go with you, Avens? Why don't you just give your little summary of your position on abortion one more time, and maybe sprinkle in some thoughts about the show today.
It's funny. I didn't think this was a particularly aggressive, we need to sprinkle good feelings, because it's been so bloodthirst.
Because it's been so contentious.
Dave and I have just been.
This really was a casual conversation about abortion.
Well, it's interesting. There were a couple of points that, yes, I will summarize and wrap up. But there were a couple of points too. Is there is no analogy that works well for the topic of abortion. And I've seen pro-choicers try to make analogies that work for abortion. I've seen pro-lifers try to make analogies that work for abortions. I've heard the hot air balloon thing a million times, and it's when you drop someone into a hot air balloon, are they also potentially harming you on the way? Because that's another thing. It's not a fetus's fault, but pregnancy can be extremely destructive to a woman's body, and that continues to be a huge aspect of why I don't want to see regulation or even prevention, even socially. If somebody's like, I do not want to endure a pregnancy, then I don't want them to have to endure that pregnancy. And I'd like them to do so. I'd like them to stop that pregnancy as quickly as possible for numerous reasons, including avoiding moral complications. Also, because it's a lot less expensive and a lot less physically traumatic to one's body to have an abortion early term. It's actually funny when we were having this discussion about both the morning after pill and then the difference between that and the medical abortion, like the
RU46.
Yeah. I always forget what number it is, and I don't want to fuck it up. But I mean,
you don't want to take the wrong one.
I'm gonna presume that I'm the only person on this podcast who has taken both of those. And so, like,
it's probably true.
I'm not sure if, you know.
Sometimes I just take handfuls of pills without looking, but I don't think I have.
And, you know, and so I definitely had a moment in my pro-choice position where I've always stood up for, you know, a woman's right to choose. I've always stood up for, you know, lacking legislation on this topic. And I had a moment in 2017 where I found myself unexpectedly pregnant. As soon as I found out, I scheduled, I called around to abortion clinics. I literally price shopped to find out who was cheapest. And then, you know, made an appointment, did all of that, and had, you know, a medical abortion. Literally took a bunch of pills. It cost me $850. I just like to point out how insane that is, because it was like 4 pills. And during that process, I made a very specific decision to, when, like, you take the pills, it stops the hormones, you take the second pill and it induces contractions. So I was at 6 weeks along. And when that happened, I did what is, just because I'm a sciencey, geeky girl, after I passed the embryonic sac, I very intentionally kept it and then put on gloves and then went through it, because I'm gross. And one of the things that happened in that is that I went, okay, I'm going to look this thing in the eye. I'm going to, like, people tell me I need to feel really horrible about killing this, so here I go. And I took a look at it, and I don't, like, it furthered my position that this is not something that I'm morally worried about at all. Because I you know, like, the embryonic sac was like about 1 inch big, and inside was an embryo that was the size of a lentil. And so, like, these are things, and it's not even about size, but the thing is, like, this isn't, to me, that wasn't something that I, like, remotely, like, I looked at it and I said, here, I'm here to figure out if I feel differently about this when I've looked it in the eye. And I didn't. And I had a very personal experience with that made it even stronger for me. But I think at the end of the day, I think that there is something that all three of us will deeply agree on, which is that the best situation is for people to not get pregnant until they want to. I think that the world would be better if we can do what we can to support as a society not having unplanned pregnancies. And that, to me, that's something that, like, I deeply care about. And then when pregnancies happen and they're unexpected or unplanned or unwanted, my goal is to have them dealt with as quickly as possible. And whether that means that, you know, in some cases there's pro-lifers who want to support, you know, supporting a woman, you know, hey, no, you can do this. You can go through your pregnancy and give it up for adoption, or you can go through your pregnancy and have a baby and be a mother. That would be great. I think that, like, for me, it's all about making sure that person gets to make that individual choice, whatever it is. And my end goal is every child that comes into this world being wanted. And I want to prevent unwanted pregnancy and then prevent the birth of children that are going to be unwanted and are going to not going to be born into situations that are going to be conducive to quality of life for everyone around them. And I know that to be people, they say, like, oh, but that's an abortion of convenience, and that's a problem. And I get that. But at the end of the day, what I want is a world where children are wanted, and where people aren't having to have unplanned pregnancies. And I want a better world through that. And so, like, my society is, hey, I want a society of people who love babies and want babies. But to me, that also includes making sure people have the right to make that decision before the baby comes into this world. But yeah, overall, I guess that's my position. That's my position reiterated.
All right. Thank you, Avens. And Dave, I think you probably have the most opposite position. If Avens is our Murray Rothbard, you are our Ron Paul. So why don't you go ahead and give your final summary of your pro-life position?
I'm more of an Ayn Rand Murray Rothbard crossover. Let's just,
Well, that's weird to picture, but yeah, Dave, if you want to just give up your summary of your position, and then is there anything you heard today that moved you in any direction at all, or just made you think about something differently?
Well, no, probably not. But I mean, I came in already. I'm somewhat sympathetic. I'm very sympathetic.
Obviously, all of you have given this deep thought before the show. So, I mean.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I'm somewhat sympathetic to evictionism. I really admire Professor Block's consistency and working from the libertarian principles that I love and cherish so much. I was bummed out that he brought up Murray Rothbard. I was hoping I could just bring up Ron Paul and no one would mention that Murray Rothbard was on the other side of that. But of course, Mr. Block got me on that one. So
you're Mister. You've been downgraded.
That's right. By my last sentence, I'll call him Walter.
Just be Walt by the end.
Look, I just have a very fundamental disagreement with Avens, and this is the problem. I'm always disappointed by second generation libertarians. This is Rand Paul all over again. So that was just a shot at Rand Paul, not you. But look, I understand. I agree that I want to live in a world where people love their children and where people get pregnant when they're ready. I mean, of course, like that would be great and that would be ideal. But the real question is whether or not that is a life, and whether it's a human life and a baby, and whether it has all of the natural and moral rights that any other human should. And to me, it's just an obvious yes. So the idea of you don't know if you're really ready for this baby, or you don't know if you're really going to love the baby, or I mean, all of these to me would be a legitimate justification to kill a 6-month-old or a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old. So I just, I can't look at it that way. And I don't want to, your personal story, I appreciate you sharing that, but maybe I won't say anything about that, but just my own personal story of having a baby and now looking that story that you told never would have gotten to me before I had my daughter. Right. And now hearing it really does get to me, because I'll tell you, after holding your baby and having a baby, looking back now, when I look at the sonogram pictures of her, and it's her, man. You see her face, you see everything. I just think that it's by the way, just one quick point on this. I don't think Professor Block was actually disagreeing with me. Before, when he said about the difference between a 1-day-old or an 8-month-old, I just said I had more of a visceral reaction to the 8-month-old. I'm not saying that there's any moral difference. I agree. I mean, the human brain doesn't stop developing until something like 25 years old. We're constantly changing. My daughter, who's right now 5 months, is a different, completely different person than she was when she was a newborn. She every day she's a different person. Look, I just think that libertarians, we call things what they are. What abortion is, in every single instance that it's practiced in reality, is the murdering of a baby. I think that you want a society that values life. As Ron Paul always says, you're not going to have a society that values liberty if you don't have one that values life. I would say this: if there was a world, which maybe we will technologically advance to in 50, 100 years or something like that, where the idea of eviction could be done, and then babies could be raised in test tubes and no baby would be hurt in the process of it, and then they could be put up for adoption, then I would subscribe to evictionism. So I guess in that sense, Walter could take the victory from me, that I would be an evictionist in this hypothetical reality. However, in the reality we live in right now, where abortion, whether you're talking about taking a pill in your first trimester that's going to stop the flow of progesterone and kill the baby inside you, and then you're going to pass the baby, or you're talking about the far more gruesome practices that happen later throughout pregnancy, all of that to me is murdering a baby. It's very black and white, and I think that's evil, and I just couldn't support it. But I really do appreciate the conversation. So thanks for having us on, Marc.
Adding evil to my bio.
All right. And Walter, I will give you the last word here to sum up why everyone but you is wrong.
Well, let me say something a little differently. My big criticism of the three of you is you don't live in New Orleans. I wish you lived in New Orleans, because I think we could all be friends. We're all staunch libertarians, and this conversation was just a lovely conversation.
We're not all friends?
All right, you heard it. Episode 500, we're all flying to New Orleans and redoing this live at Walter's house.
We can now be acquaintances, but we can't be friends because we don't see each other that much. I wish we were. I think this is one of the most lovely conversations I've ever been in. We have
the most lovely conversation about abortion.
Most lovely conversation that I've ever been on any subject, and even more so this subject, because this is a really contentious subject, and nobody lost his cool or her cool. Nobody yelled at anyone, and I've been in a lot of conversations where the people talk nasty to other people, and we were all very civil, and I appreciate that. I've been through many more debates maybe than you people. I'm a little older than you, and this is one of the best that I've ever been part of. I also want to say, Avens, I regret that you had not an abortion. You didn't have an abortion. You had an eviction. And I'm sure you had your own reasons for it, but I regret it because if this baby was anything like you, and I'm sure it would have been, I would have been happy to be that baby's friend as well.
I appreciate that.
Well, that is a very nice note to wrap things up on. Thank you all for coming on today. Like Walter said, this was probably, I'm just going to declare it the nicest conversation about abortion that's ever occurred in the history of the world, and I will mark it at thusly. So thank you so much for joining me. Yes, thank you guys so much, and I really appreciate all of you coming on, especially sharing your story, Avens. I know that's maybe it is easy for you because you talk about everything, but it might not be easy for everyone.
Facebook,
so I talk about. Yeah, for you it's probably no big deal, but I appreciate all of you coming on here and having such a great conversation about what is often a very contentious topic out there in the world. But what's awesome about libertarians is we can break down the nuance of things and try to look at things rationally and not end up hating each other and throwing our arms up in the air at the end. So thank you all so much for your support. Coming on for my 400th episode and for having a great conversation. Keep up the great work, everybody. And Walter, it looks like you have something else to say.
Yeah, thanks for being a great moderator.
Thank you, Marc.
Thanks,
we love
Marc.
you.
All right, friends, and that will do it. That was episode 400, and I can say we probably won't do any shows on abortion for quite some time. It's a subject I haven't really gone into at all in the first 400 episodes. It's been mentioned in a show here and there, and of course, I did do that episode, which I'll link to in today's show notes over at lionsofliberty.com//400, of course, the 400th episode. We really keep things simple around here. But for the most part, it's not a subject I focus on a lot, mostly because I'm in many ways still conflicted. Even after this interview, even after this hour-long show where we're trying to break things down, I still have conflicted views on the subject because at the end of the day, this is a subject, a very rare subject, a very rare instance where the rights of two individuals really are in conflict. The mother is an individual. She has rights. She has, in theory, the right to have something in her body or not, and then that fetus is also, in my view, an individual growing human that should have an extent of rights as well. Where do I get from all that after listening to everything today and hearing all the arguments? I still get to a point where I'm conflicted on the subject. That's how difficult this subject is, and I think if you're not somewhat conflicted, and I think even everyone on the show today probably has some kind of conflicts about it. It's not a clean issue. It's not a perfect issue, no matter what position you take. I think that is kind of the first step in talking about this stuff, is at least recognizing that it's a nuanced and difficult issue. But that is why I want to give it its due. And what better way to do it than in this celebration of 400 episodes. But I do hope you found value in this conversation. And again, I encourage you to encourage your friends and family to check out this program if you do indeed get value from it. Now, I'm just going to ask you for one more favor, one tiny little favor, and this is sort of an announcement, but it's sort of a pre-announcement announcement. But essentially, I'm going to be starting a new podcast sometime in 2019. I don't really know exactly when. Exactly when will be somewhat determined by the response I get out there, and obviously, the place I'm going to start is with the current listeners of this show. Now, this show will not be a direct part of Lions of Liberty. Of course, a larger goal is to funnel more people back to the show, but essentially the gist is that, both in real life and in various podcasts I've done, particularly the segment of The System is Down called Tripartisan Triggering, where I'm specifically discussing issues with non-libertarians in a very friendly way, like they're real humans, not like they're bots on the internet, which, a lot of conversations can turn into nowadays, when we're just typing away on Twitter, typing away on Facebook, getting fired up. But when you have real conversations with people, sure, you're not going to necessarily turn them into libertarians overnight, but when you can understand their perspective and show them that you're on their side in so many ways with your overall principles that we don't want people to to be poor. We don't want people to be starving. We do want people to get great educations. We do want people to have opportunities to succeed in life. We want people to have all these things. We just have a different approach. And I really find value in having these kind of conversations with people who just don't see our point of view, with people who see drastically different points of views. And there are different ways you can approach it, but the one way I want to approach it is through this podcast forum that I've spent over 5 years. I wouldn't say perfecting because it's always a work in progress, but 5 years working on here at Lions of Liberty. And I want to take it to, I don't want to say a wider audience, but just sort of a wider depth of people who might be open to listening to it and maybe sort of get them thinking in a different way that isn't so overtly libertarian in nature. So that's basically my idea. And to be honest, I haven't thought about much more beyond that, but I do want it to be a very long form type show, a very unplanned conversation where I simply discuss philosophy and politics with someone who I know has a differing view from the libertarian bent. And that might be a vastly differing view. It might be, might be not that dissimilar, but there might be some major subjects that we disagree on that we can go into. So this can go in a few different directions. For now, I've just set up a Patreon for it, and I'm not actually accepting any money. I've set it up so it is per creation right now. And there are no creations coming in the next, probably not in the next month or two, at least until I get past Porkfest, because my next month is pretty insane. But maybe sometime later in the summer, again, depending on the response, I'm going to start working on this in a more serious way. Come up with a title. I don't even have a title. Come up with guests. Come up with a format. All the stuff you have to do beforehand to get a podcast going. But the reason I'm starting the Patreon now is that I want this to be listener built from the get-go. I want people who want to see this show happen help me to shape it, help me to name it, help me to mold it, and make it whatever they want it to be. And obviously, this is the base of which I plan to start, because you're the people that already listen to me. At least sometimes you do. So if you don't mind, do me one more favor. I'm going to link to it in today's show notes at lionsofliberty.com/400. You can also find it for now at patreon.com/Marc Clair. Just my name, M-A-R-C. There's no K in my name, my first or last name, M-A-R-C. C-L-A-I-R. Patreon.com/Marc Clair. Just check it out. Give it a read. See if you like what I'm thinking about doing with it. And if you like, give a pledge. Avens O'Brien, today's guest, actually already gave me a pledge today, as well as a few other people. In fact, I'm going to thank them right now for signing up for this thing before I even announce it on the podcast. But we got Nick Tucker, Joey Meyer, Dan Mahoney, Dan Roberts, Charles Schrader, Andrew Kern, and the aforementioned Avens O'Brien. They have all already pledged for this new podcast that doesn't have a name, doesn't exist, doesn't have anything except an idea. So I really want to thank these initial early supporters, but I do, again, encourage you to check it out at patreon.com/Marc Clair. Let me know what you think. Help me craft this thing, be a part of something new and exciting. And speaking of new and exciting, I'm doing a little something new and exciting next week. I'm hosting a debate between our friend Anthony Samaroff, who has already participated in one debate on this program, over UBI, Universal Basic Income, with Michael Munger. I'll post that in today's show notes. He's been on the show a couple times. And Anthony approached me about debating the labor theory of value, a major component of Marxist ideology. And he's going to be debating it with a professor, a Marxist economist professor, a man by the name of Richard Wolff, who is fairly prominent in his field and fairly well known within at least the Marxist economic community, I guess you might say. And he's actually debating Gene Epstein later this year at the Soho Forum. So I'm very, very excited for next week's episode. And it in many ways reflects the kind of thing I'm trying to do with this new podcast that I'll be launching later this year. So tune in for that next week. Very excited to bring that one to you. Tune in to Brian McWilliams this Wednesday when he slaps you upside the head with his weekly shot of comedy, culture, and liberty on Electric Liberty Land. And of course, wrap things up on Friday with John Odermatt's hard-hitting, inspiring look at the broken criminal justice system on Felony Friday. And until next time, my little Liberty kitty cats, live long and live free.